Greetings everybody, this is Leviathan here, and today I'm doing a little bit of a different video because usually I'm talking about what just happened in the game or an upcoming change, but this is more of like a wish list of what I'd like to see updated or changed for the Shadow set for the Demon Hunter. This is by far my favorite set. I've logged lots of hours on this, even when it's not been the most popular or powerful playstyle for the Demon Hunter. There's just something about the fact that you get to turn into a melee god on the DH that I really vibe with. And the reason that I'm doing this video at this current moment is we're deep into the middle of season 24. And one thing that always crept up, even when this was in PTR and then eventually when it went to live, was so many complaints that there wasn't any support for the Demon Hunter's Shadow setup, and that with the ethereals. And the reason for that is just the way that they decided to do the ethereals. It focused primarily on bows. So you had a crossbow, we have a hand crossbow, and we have a regular bow. So that left no room for there to be another ethereal that was a melee one. And the reason that matters is because the Shadow set relies on, at least for the two-piece set bonus, having a melee weapon. It's a lot of damage to miss out on, so you just wouldn't put the two together. Therefore, Shadow set's probably the most unpopular of the DH sets this season, but in general it's also lagged behind since like season 10, and season 10 was sort of when it got its first update that brought it into relevance and made it actually good. Along the way that it's had some updates and some number bumps and items around it have improved as well, but it's always played second fiddle to something else, whether it was LOD rapid fire, now GOD. So I would like to see it at least get bumped up more. If it could be on par, that would be like the best, because then you'd have multiple options. If it exceeded GOD, I wouldn't complain, but you know, I think you would then be able to choose from some of your favorite playstyles, because people really love how Gears of Dreadlands turned out. And I know that there are a ton of fans of Impale and Shadow set in general. So if you could have like two viable options that are really fun to play for the DH, that would be just amazing. So I came up with a couple of changes that I personally like. And if you have some, if I missed out on something, you know, I'm just trying to think of this. I almost woke up from like a fever dream of like, I need to make this video. And that's the reason I'm doing it this morning. If you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the comments or just like reply to whatever. Like, let's have some discussion so we can hopefully get the Shadow set to be as good as possible. I don't think it'll make it into like the PTR for the next season, for season 25 or anything like that, because that's probably around the corner. But if this just gives the devs some ideas of maybe a way that they could improve Shadow or melee DH in general, then hopefully we can do that and we can, you know, see an impact on the game. So on this list here, the first one is just fully adopting melee. And what I mean by that is melee was kind of tacked on to the Demon Hunter as they decided to give it the Shadow set. Shadows originally came in as like a 4-piece set. It wasn't fully fleshed out. Eventually they made it 6-piece, and they really took it, you know, to a whole new level for the DH. And like I was mentioning, season 10 was its heyday. It was actually one of the best builds to push with. It's always had a really good spot as a Rift Guardian killer because of its single target damage. And that primarily got improved once we got the shotgunning aspect of it with the Holy Point shot quiver. So I want to like dig back into that, but also just have melee be this justified playstyle for the Demon Hunter. And so if you look at archery, this is sort of its general passive that gives it, you know, depending on what you're equipping, you get some bonus. And so you have bows, crossbows, hand crossbows, and if you're dual wielding, 2 hand crossbows. You get all these bonuses. And I looked at this and I said, well, hi, no melee weapons are here. What about sword and dagger, since that's now a viable playstyle for the Demon Hunter? So I would want them to basically change this, because you can't really call it archery if you're going to have sword and dagger in there. And I would just call it like, I have here munitions master. If that's too close to weapons minister, then call it like munitions expert. I don't know, I like the alliteration. Name doesn't really matter. But I would add swords and daggers and then do an attack speed bonus, because that's what's missing from archery. There's no attack speed in here. And that would vibe really well with how Shadows works, because ideally you have a ton of resource coming back with your Carly's Point with Impale, and therefore you don't really spend your resource, so attack speed is the thing that now, you know, really modifies how much damage you can put out, because it's just how much can you attack, since nothing that you're attacking with costs anything. And so the values, I think, you know, the balance is balanced, so maybe the devs will figure it out. But the value that I originally thought would be like 75% attack speed, and yes, that sounds crazy. That's basically like a fully powered up Echoing Fury power now. It would be noticeable though, and that's the reason why I initially was like, do 75%, because when I've tried to get the Echoing Fury to work in the Shadow setup, it felt really good when you had all those attack speed bonuses popping off. 75 is probably a little much to be given from just this passive, so you could turn it down. The one thing that I wanted to compare it to was Paragon. So if you look in offense, it's very similar values here as to what you saw for when you're equipping like a hand crossbow or a crossbow with the crit stats. So then in here, according to this, right, the equivalent would be a 10% attack speed. And that's nice. Maybe I would go with like 25 or something. I just want it to feel noticeable. And the reason is that breakpoints are a thing. So you would want to hit like at least a few higher breakpoints that would make it so that you are noticeably throwing out more daggers faster. And that would just really help the game. That would help both solo and Rift Guardian killing for stacking up the Bane of the Stricken as a RGK Shadow Impale Demon Hunter. So that's one idea that I had. And then also something I thought was, okay, if you don't even want to update archery, just leave it alone. Let's go for a dedicated melee passive. So you could get rid of an unpopular one like Brooding or Sharpshooter. I don't really see these in use. I don't see anyone that would really be upset if they were gone. And it would be like similar to Wizard's Audacity, which I have pulled up here on the side. So with Audacity, you deal 30% additional damage to enemies within 15 yards. So it's basically just if you're staying close to enemies, you get a damage multiplier. And this is powerful. This is something that you would choose if your playstyle supported it. Now, when I thought about this, I also realized that you can play a lot of other Demon Hunter builds in close range too, especially like GOD. So this could just be a straight up buff to GOD. So something else that I imagined was that you could limit this and say that it would only be for melee specific. So just say with a melee weapon equipped, you deal 30% additional damage to enemies within 15 yards or something to that effect, right? So that way you can at least lock it down a little bit if that's something that's important to the dev, so that you can use this passive specifically for that playstyle and not benefit others. And just, you know, if we're trying to bring balance, we don't want to introduce something that also makes everything else powerful as well. So that was my first idea. The second one, and a bit of a shorter one, but one that is going to be useful to those that have gone through this pain, is making Daggers drop more frequently, same rate as bows, crossbows, hand crossbows. So basically give it the smart loot effect. So what this means is, right now, whenever you're going through like a T16 Rift as a Demon Hunter, if you look at your rares that drop, you're going to get plenty of stuff. And a lot of the weapons will be hand crossbows, bows, crossbows, because those are the things that the Demon Hunter is naturally, you know, going to be using. Now again, when they gave the Demon Hunter the Shadow set, they didn't really account for, you know, smart loot and all these other things. It's actually the reason why when you're upgrading your daggers for the Demon Hunter, it's such a nice and easy way to get a juicy weapon, because there's only two options that you get out of it. You either get your Lord Greenstone's Fan or your Carlace Point. But in order to get those rare daggers, usually you have to craft them at Hadrig, and that just adds an additional cost to your crafting overall. Now, if you could just collect them along the way, collect the daggers while you're playing T16, then that cost for crafting them initially goes away, and then the only crafting cost is just upgrading them from rare to legendary. This is like a kind of a nitpicky complaint, but it's just the fact that we are looking for melee weapons when we are a Shadow DH, so it would be nice if they just dropped as often. Really, I think you could, you know, if you're actually keeping an eye out for them, you would maybe go through a huge session of T16s and get like 3 daggers or something right now. So I don't know what the numbers or the tomfoolery needs to be behind the scenes to make it work, but they should just drop more frequently. And also for swords too, if you apply something that I'll talk about in just a moment. And then next on the list would be getting a multiplier for Chain of Shadows. So again, I mentioned that, and then we can use the leaderboards to illustrate this. I mentioned that Shadows is kind of behind the times when it comes to Demon Hunters. So if you look here, this person has an insane amount of Paragon. Again, this is non-seasonal, so before you get all crazy, these Paragon numbers make sense for us being at season 24 now, and all your Paragon rolling, or all your experience rolling over to non-seasonal. So this person has 12,455 Paragon. They cleared a 143. Now, these leaderboards were like sort of recently refreshed, or refreshed-ish, so who knows if they've pushed as high as they possibly can, but this is with a GOD setup. So it's sort of showing you what God is capable of, right? Like in the mid 140s. If you look, now that we have these lovely leaderboards that show you all the different sets, you look for the Shadow Impale on, again, normal, non-seasonal. And this person has 11,400 Paragon, so pretty comparable. And they've cleared a 137. And again, who knows if it's fully optimized or whatever, but just taking general assumptions, you have this person clearing a high 130, but that's pretty far behind God, right? If you just look at God isolated, there's a bunch of 140s here. Before you even get to one, you can't even get to 137 to be on the front page here. So just using that as sort of a benchmark, it's clear that the set needs more love, or the playstyle needs more love. And so one way that I would do that is just take the Chain of Shadows, which is pretty much an auto include when you're using your shadow set, and just give it a power, give it a multiplier. And I mentioned Lamentation in my notes, and they did this for the Barbarian in the past, so it kind of could just come in the same justification or the same format, where it doesn't necessarily need to be an insane multiplier. Again, I'm not the numbers guy, I'm not the math cruncher, so they can figure out exactly what the percent should be. If it's a range, that's fine too, because I like having the hunt for getting those perfect items. But it's a perfectly viable slot for them to give more power to the set, or to the playstyle, because you're going to be using that belt regardless. So you might as well give it a nice juicy multiplier, and that way now you can bump the build up a few more notches. And so when we're thinking about this, though, it's something to mention that there is multiple things happening here, right? So if we go with this new melee passive, or adopting attack speed onto archery, or what would be the new archery passive, that already is giving the setup more power. So it's not like you need to solve catching up shadows to the highest God or whatever with just the Chain of Shadows multiplier, because you can also leverage this change as well. So what I'm saying is there could be multiple changes that happen. You could even put them on the set itself, right? If they wanted to increase some of the numbers on like the 2-piece, which would be insane, or like the 6-piece, which that number just keeps getting bigger, then that would also be another way to leverage catching the set up to some of the more powerful stuff that exists out there. So, that's just so when I talk about the numbers or like what the multiplier should be, like I don't know what that number is. And there are multiple levers they can pull basically to give the set more power overall. And then last but not least is Chakram. So Chakram is this skill that is so good and it's not used at all. Like Chakram is so much fun. The only time we really use it is when we're leveling from 1 to 70. Let me just find it here. And it's so great in the leveling process. And even now, like we're kind of getting away from using it too, because there's all these other strategies with Fan of Knives and stuff, if you get the right items anyways when you're leveling. So like Chakram is really losing its spot as just like a skill that needs help and love and use. Twin Chakram is so cool, like the Shuriken Cloud where you can actually spin it around you. Like there's so many cool skills here and runes for this skill, but it's just like not used at all. So I think we need to like fully embrace like the ninja aspect of shadows and have Chakram just be added to the set. Now how that would work, I'm not entirely sure, because the 6-piece set bonus is rather specific, that it gives impale that increased damage for the first enemy hit. So I don't know if you would just throw Chakram in there as well, because I think Chakram wouldn't necessarily benefit from doing a ton of damage for the first enemy hit. Like it would kind of just want its damage to be general. So I think you could actually take like the Aegis of Valor approach here. You could kind of turn the set into two things. So when you're like speed farming with the shadow setup, maybe that's when you're using Chakram, and Chakram just has its own multiplier value that gets tacked on to the 6-piece set. And that's kind of what you see now with the Crusader with Fist of the Heavens. That's sort of used as the Crusader's speed farming setup for Aegis of Valor. Let's see if I can find it here. And you can see like Fist of the Heavens empowers Heaven's Fury, but then on the 6-piece set, it also just has a damage increase, a multiplier for it as well. So you can see it applies to both skills, right? So it'd be something like that, where, the impale language is what it is, and it's very specific to impale, but maybe you could also just have something that gives some love to Chakram, just tack it on, and maybe even do it more eloquently than that, or, more with greater flourish than just tacking it on. It's just something to think about. I want to throw that idea out there that Chakram is amazing, and there's a great opportunity to bring it back and make it good again. And you could also update the Chakram items as well. So like there's spines of seething hatred as a quiver that nobody uses. It takes the resource cost away from Chakram. So again, it kind of fits into this idea of like not having resource issues with your shadow setup if you're using impale or if you're using Chakram. So that could be interesting, right? And then you just throw a multiplier on that, similar to how we have it for like 9th series satchel, or you know, any of the more compelling quivers like Dead Man's Legacy, etc. And you also have this sort of ill will that helps out Chakram, and it's not the greatest multiplier. I think just these are like behind the times. They were good when they were introduced, kinda, but maybe not even really. And they just need like way more love now in the state of the game that we currently play in. So you could also make Chakram another option. You could either make it a fully crazy DPS option that would rival impale, or position it as something that impale could speed farm with. And especially it would be cool because Chakram could sort of be the thing that you use for impale or for shadows when you're at your lower difficulties, because the big thing that impale runs into is that you need that reoccurring hit on the Carly's point in order to get the hatred coming back. But if you are one-shotting stuff, then you don't get the hatred back because you haven't impaled that same target twice. So you usually run out of hatred very quickly in the lower tier stuff where you're one-shotting. But Chakram could step in and say, actually, I'll handle that for you. I'm the thing you use when you're just way too powerful and you want to speed farm super duper quickly. But in any case, those are my four ideas to throw out there for the shadow changes. I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you agree with any of these, if you have ideas to flesh them out further, if you have your own ideas when it comes to how to improve shadows in the modern age of Diablo 3, definitely hop into the comments and let me know. Thank you again for hanging out in the channel and watching this video. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Adios for now.